Karoline Leavitt, White House press secretary, stepped into the Metropolitan Bank in Washington, D.C., carrying a $50,000 check for her husband Nicholas Rio's real estate project, determined to handle the transaction herself and show her independence. Wearing a simple blazer, she felt confident yet a bit nervous, a faint smile playing on her lips as she walked through the towering glass doors of banks. Interior gleamed with marble floors and glossy DI signs that read, "We welcome all," but that welcoming message quickly soured when she approached the counter. Elizabeth Carter, the teller, eyed her sharply, recognizing her from the media. Karoline handed over the check, and Elizabeth's voice rose loud and skeptical. $50,000. For someone like you, we need to check thoroughly. The words rang out across the lobby, drawing glances from nearby customers. Karoline's heart raced, but she held her composure. Years of public scrutiny had taught her, well, this is legitimate money, she said, firmly sliding across the necessary documents, including the project contract and financial verification. Elizabeth took the papers with lips pursed and made no effort to speed things up. Instead, she exchanged a look with her colleague Sarah, who stood nearby. Karoline felt a surge of indignation, but remained calm for now. She stood her ground even as the air in the marble hall grew heavy with judgment as Elizabeth held the check without processing it. Karoline's gaze locked onto her, reading every nuance of disdain. The whispers around the bank pricked at her pride, but she kept her expression neutral, though inside a storm raged. Elizabeth's slow movements, an icy tone. We have strict regulations, especially for large transactions from people like you. Slice through the air like a blade. People like you. Karoline understood instantly. It wasn't about the check. It was about who she was. A Trump conservative targeted not for fraud, but for her politics. She replied with measured control, sliding a thicker stack of papers forward. The check comes from my husband's company, and if you need verification, I can call now. Elizabeth offered fake smile. No rush, she said, then turned to Sarah, who had dyed green hair, and whispered something. They both smirked, a gesture quiet enough to dodge accusation, but clear enough for Karoline to catch their contempt. She stood at the counter as more customers began to notice. A man in a suit whispered to his companion, "Is she from the White House?" A young woman in an environmental shirt shook her head, clearly disapproving. Karoline realized the bank wasn't a neutral space. It had become a stage where she was cast as the antagonist. Another employee named Mark appeared behind the counter, young and seemingly impartial. When he caught Karoline's eye, he gave a small, empathetic nod that reassured her, if only briefly. Mark scanned the documents and said, "Everything seems fine," but Elizabeth immediately countered, "We can't rush. This bank has standards. Not everyone gets treated like a VIP." The words hit like a slap. Elizabeth was not just delaying the transaction. She was making a public statement. Karoline checked her phone, feigning casualness, but started making mental notes of every slight. Elizabeth Carter, doubting the check. Political jabs, favoring certain customers over others. She had learned in her White House days to document everything, because truth needs evidence. Her eyes darted around the bank, watching as an elderly couple was warmly welcomed and led to a VIP area, while a man in a conservative logo shirt was told to wait. The bias was glaring. Karoline remembered a Fox News interview where she spoke about real fairness being about equal treatment for all. Now she stood in a bank that flaunted DI, yet punished her for her political affiliation. The ticking wall clock added weight to the tension. When Elizabeth finally returned, she placed the check down, not to process it, but to declare coldly, "You'll have to wait. We need more verification." It could take hours. Karoline bit back the urge to confront her directly, knowing any escalation could be used against her as disruptive. She took another breath, deciding to gather more observations. Her phone buzzed a text from Nicholas asking if she was okay and offering to help. She smiled faintly, heartened, but chose not to call this was her battle. For now, Elizabeth moved on quickly, helping a new customer wearing an equality slogan shirt with exaggerated cheerfulness. "We'll handle this right away." Karoline gripped her phone, watching the double standard play out. Moments ago, she had been treated like a potential criminal. Now Elizabeth was all sweetness to someone who clearly matched her values. Karoline leaned against the window, feeling the glass chill through her blazer, her presence still drawing occasional glances from a nearby security guard, as if she were the threat. It was a bitter contrast to her days at the White House podium, fielding questions from international media, and now treated like a pariah in her own capital city. She opened her notes app and started typing fast. "Elizabeth favors certain customers. Hostility toward me is politically motivated." She remembered a night in New Hampshire during her campaign, when an elderly voter told her they'll try to knock you down, but you're stronger than that. Those words grounded her now, even as her pulse pounded. Karoline's eyes scanned the room again, seeing the same pattern play out. A man in a conservative jacket was told to fill out more forms with a sharp tone from Sarah, while a progressive couple discussing a charity event were led to plush seats by a smiling Elizabeth. She added to her notes, clear bias pattern, not just against me. Mark passed by again with a stack of papers, his expression apologetic, but he didn't stop. Meanwhile, Sarah whispered something to another teller, both glancing at Karoline with veiled amusement. She felt like a character forced into the role of the outcast in Elizabeth's carefully curated performance. Her thoughts drifted to Nicholas and their son Nico playing at home. She remembered Nicholas telling her, "You don't need to prove anything to anyone, but I know you wish you want to call and pour out the injustice of it all." But she stayed firm. This was her moment, and she wasn't backing down. The low murmur voices swelled around her. A young customer with a backpack muttered to a friend, "She's a Trump lady, right? No way she's being discriminated against." Here the doubt stung, but Karoline didn't flinch. She simply wondered, how did a routine deposit become a political battlefield? Why was her fairness up for debate? She looked at Elizabeth, now gushing over another customer, guiding them through paperwork with mock warmth. The difference in treatment was blatant. Karoline saw it clearly. Elizabeth didn't just want to delay her. She wanted her diminished, made invisible. But Karoline wasn't one to shrink under pressure. She had faced war rooms, press traps, and campaign chaos. A petty bank teller wouldn't break her. Karoline Leavitt remained standing, leaning against the cold glass of the Metropolitan Bank. As the setting sun cast her long shadow across the polished floor, the whispers behind her swelling. But her spine never bowed. This was only the beginning, and she would not let Elizabeth win. The notes app in Karoline's phone displayed lines about Elizabeth Carter's bias, like a map guiding her through the storm of injustice swirling around her. Customers whispered nearby, and Elizabeth's clicking heels echoed across the marble floor. But Karoline remained laser-focused, her eyes sharp and vigilant, like when she prepped for fiery White House press briefings. Suddenly, a figure entered the bank, and every gaze shifted to him. A tall man in an expensive gray suit, his commanding presence undeniable with each confident step. Karoline squinted, something about him nagging her memory, until the name slipped from Elizabeth's lips in a syrupy tone as she rushed to greet him. "Mr. Thornton, such an honor to see you today." The name jolted Karoline. James Thornton, the rival real estate CEO Nicholas had often mentioned, the man who constantly thwarted her husband's projects. Karoline instinctively leaned forward, aware her position might be risky, but her need to uncover the truth outweighed caution. Elizabeth led Thornton to a shadowed corner near the manager's office where the light barely reached. With a furtive glance, she handed him a small USB drive, the word confidential catching a faint glint under the dim lamp. Thornton smiled with satisfaction, murmuring something Karoline couldn't quite hear. Her heart pounded. This wasn't mere bias. This was a scheme, maybe even one targeting Nicholas. Hands trembling slightly, Karoline switched her camera app and zoomed in, trying to capture Elizabeth passing off the USB. Sunlight streaked across the window, making the screen hazy, but she managed a few shots just before Thornton pocketed the drive. Typing quickly, she noted, "Elizabeth gave confidential USB to James Thornton 3:15 p.m. plot against Nicholas's company." She knew the risk. If Elizabeth noticed, she could easily spin the situation to paint Karoline as disruptive. But the truth stared her in the face, and she refused to look away. Elizabeth's eyes darted around, seemingly sensing the scrutiny. Karoline ducked her head, pretending to check a text, her pulse racing. She remembered a moment in the White House when she caught a reporter twisting President Trump's words to manufacture a scandal, and how she had learned that the evidence was only as powerful as the moment you chose to use it. Now was not the time to strike. She needed more. Thornton turned to leave, but Elizabeth tugged him back, whispering urgently. Karoline strained to listen, catching the word Richio, a name that chilled her blood. That was Nicholas's biggest real estate venture, a multi-million-dollar project. She typed another note. Thornton knows about Nicholas's Richio project. Elizabeth feeding him info. Karoline's eyes flicked toward Mark, the one employee who had shown her some kindness. He stood sorting papers behind the counter, his gaze flicking briefly to hers, as if hinting at something. She nodded faintly, hoping he'd back her if needed, but she knew better than to rely on anyone yet. Sarah, Elizabeth's colleague, moved subtly toward the back corner, clearly backing her superior. Karoline saw then Elizabeth wasn't acting alone. There was a network, and she had wandered into its center. Suddenly, Elizabeth spun back toward the lobby, her gaze sweeping over everyone until her eyes locked onto Karoline's. Still here, Elizabeth snapped, striding toward her. "I told you to wait. That doesn't mean you get to roam free." She motioned toward the guard, who immediately stepped closer, his posture rigid and intimidating. Karoline remained calm despite the thudding in her chest. "I'm just standing as you asked," she replied evenly, keeping her eyes fixed on Elizabeth. The power play was obvious, and Elizabeth was banking on fear to break her resolve. But Karoline wasn't someone who broke under pressure. She had stood at the White House podium, faced off against hostile media. A bank teller with a grudge wouldn't make her flinch. Elizabeth huffed, spinning away, but not before snapping at the guard. "Keep her there. Don't let her bother the other customers." The guard planted himself like a living wall between Karoline and the rest of the bank. She felt trapped like a lion in a glass cage, but she refused to let anger override her strategy. She checked the USB photos. They were clear. She quickly texted Nicholas, "Trouble at the bank. Don't come yet. I'm handling it." She wasn't ready to involve him. This was still her battle to fight. Karoline thought of Nico, her little boy waiting at home. She ached to be with him, to forget all this. But if Elizabeth and Thornton were colluding to sabotage Nicholas, she had to act, not just for her family, but for every innocent victim of schemes like these. Thornton left the bank, his steps smooth and self-assured like a man who believed he'd already won. Elizabeth returned to the counter, her once syrupy smile now tight and tense. Karoline saw it, the flicker of worry. Maybe she knew she had slipped. She added another note. "Elizabeth tense after Thornton leaves. She knows she's exposed." Karoline breathed deeply, drawing on the words her father had once told her as a child. "Truth always wins, but only if you're strong enough to defend it." She stared at Elizabeth, who had just returned to her post, while the USB photos on her phone glowed like an unlit fuse waiting for ignition. The guard still loomed nearby and the sense of isolation thickened, but she didn't waver. Elizabeth's heels clicked again, and Karoline could feel the rhythm building like a war drum. The bank was watching. The whispers had turned into quiet curiosity. Elizabeth's eyes flicked toward her, a mocking smile on her lips. "Still patient, Miss Leavitt," she called out loudly, intentionally mangling the name to draw attention. Sarah, nearby, giggled like a sidekick in a high school play, reveling in the moment. A few customers turned to look, some curious, some annoyed. Karoline felt her cheeks burn with heat. She had endured the subtle bias, the long delays, and now public mockery. She stepped forward, voice calm but clipped. "I've waited over an hour. My check is legitimate. My paperwork is complete. Why haven't you processed it?" Elizabeth's smile vanished. "Don't rush, Miss Leavitt," she snapped. "This bank has rules. Not everyone gets special treatment, especially people," she paused and finished with, "like you, who stir controversy." The jab landed squarely at Karoline's political identity, her conservative values now on trial before the court of public opinion. Karoline inhaled deeply, drawing from those fierce pressroom battles where one wrong answer could destroy your career. She knew Elizabeth wanted an outburst, something she could spin as disruptive behavior. But Karoline wasn't here for theatrics. "I'm not asking for privilege," she said, her voice clear and sharp. "I'm asking for fairness, like any other customer." The room fell silent for a moment. A young man with earbuds whispered, "She's at a point." But Sarah pounced in, her voice shrill. "Fairness? You think you deserve it after what you stand for?" Her comment ignited a fresh wave of side-eye and whispered judgments. Karoline felt like she was on trial with Elizabeth as judge, Sarah as prosecutor, and the customers as jury. She glanced again at Mark. He stood frozen, clutching paperwork, eyes silently pleading. She gave him the faintest nod. "I'm okay." But she wasn't backing down. "I'm not here for political fights," Karoline declared, her voice ringing out. "I just want to deposit money. If you can't do that, I want a manager." Her demand sliced through the air like a blade, making Elizabeth falter. Before she could respond, Caroline raised her voice again. And I want to know why you were dealing with James Thornton over there. Was it about my check? The question struck like lightning. Elizabeth's expression froze, and her hands gripped the counter. What are you talking about?